watchers or new listeners, would you mind giving us a brief introduction to who you are?
So my name's Mark Williams-Thomas. I'm an investigative reporter and a criminologist, and my background really is in policing. So I was a detective. I then left the police service, went into television, and that's, I suppose, where people get to know me from in relation to my investigations. I have a series on Netflix called The Investigator, and I'm probably best known for exposing Jimmy Savile.
From one high-profile case, the Savile one, you mentioned earlier another high-profile case involving a child, which is Madeline Mccann.
Yeah, lots of Madeline Mccann investigations. I was on the ground when Madeline disappeared within 72 hours.
Were you? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I flew out to Praia da Luz and I was on the ground within 72 hours covering it for Sky News and covered it, for about 10 days, morning, evening, doing, live talks outside, and it became part of my life, a huge part of my life, actually. It kind of took over at times because it was such a massive story, and massive, I mean worldwide. In my time in covering television, I've probably covered the biggest crime stories. So obviously Jimmy Savile, I covered Madeline Mccann, I got the world exclusive interview with Oscar Pistorius, murders in cases where people have admitted murder to me, some huge, huge cases out there. And I think, Madeline Mccann sits right up the top of that in terms of profile, in terms of coverage. And I finally said, okay, let's make a program about it, but let's do it in a different way. And we know over the last couple of years, there was a suspect named by the Germans, Christian B. And I said, let's go and investigate what they have on him. And I started to investigate it, and we went on the road for 6 weeks, Germany, Portugal, and we did a years-long investigation, and we got access to Christian B. through his lawyer, talked to him in prison, very close to getting an interview with him in prison, but the prison authorities refused us to do that. And we basically uncovered an alibi for him.
Oh, wow.
To show that actually the German authorities are wrong. And it's now become a slight battle between the German prosecutor and me, where the German prosecutor has been quite critical of me, and I've been critical of him. He's absolutely responsible for murdering Madeline Mccann. Well, no, I don't think he is for a start, but ultimately that's not your call. That's the court's call to make that. But the sad reality is as long as we go looking, or as long as the country is focused on looking for Christian B's evidence, and of which they've been investigating him now for nearly 4 years, and they haven't got enough evidence to prosecute him, that tells you it all. And so when I looked at Madeline Mccann, I did exactly the same. I brought all the information together. I read all the police files. I spoke to all those key witnesses around there. And, I had a contact via, not directly, but via one person removed with the family. And so I was able to put all this information together. And my conclusion is that on that night of Madeline's disappearance, she woke up looking for mum and dad. And she'd been told the morning that if she were to wake up, the parents were only in the tapas bar, which was just across the courtyard. Because what we do know is Sean Amelie's, the brother and sister, had woken up on the previous nights a number of times. And I suspect as a result of that, Madeline thought, well, where is mum and dad? Because they'd been out on those previous nights as well. And so I believe she woke up. She left the apartment. We know the apartment was insecure. So the back patio door was open. And the reason it was open was to allow some flow of air. It was very hot. And there was no air conditioning in those apartments. And so I believe she got up and she went wandering and looking for her parents. And in order to come out of that apartment, you have to go onto the main road where there's a footpath, to travel down the footpath, to then go back into the apartment to go to where the tapas bar is. And I believe that nobody went into the apartment. Madeline left that apartment that night. Everything supports that. There's no evidence that suggests somebody has gone into that apartment. And there is evidence when you look at cases, and I did a lot of research around child abductions, and actually so much so that I went over to Texas and spoke with the FBI and at a conference around child abductions, looking at our cases, looking at the cases I have. And we've got two very prominent cases in the UK. Jeanette Tate, who went missing in the 1970s, she was cycling up at the top of the hill, down the top of the hill. She was a matter of minutes away from her friends. And by the time they got to the bottom of the hill, her bike was on the floor and she'd vanished. Matter of minutes, 90 seconds to 2-3 minutes. And then we've got Sarah Payne, who went missing. She vanished. She was walking out with her parents. They were walking across a field. She went through this hole in the fence, and as she went through this hole in the fence, parents were just behind. And as they come through that, she's vanished. God. Fortunately, Sarah's brother sees a white van just drive away, and that was the Roy Whiting, who was the kidnapper who took her. And what that tells you is that on both of those occasions, we don't know who abducted Jeanette Tate, although we think it's Black, who's now dead. But in relation to Roy Whiting, who did abduct Sarah Payne, what we know is it was utterly unplanned.
Spontaneous.
He did not know he was going to abduct a child, but it wasn't Sarah. It was totally opportunistic. And what we know about child abductions, where there are stranger abductions, they are opportunistic. If you abduct a child and you know who that child is, which is the majority of the child abductions, then of course that's planned and you know who the child is. But when it's opportunistic, when it's not somebody known to the child, that is not planned in terms of who the victim is. So I believe that she walked out on the road and in a matter of seconds was abducted by a predator outside. Now, that supports all the evidence we know about looking at child abductions. Opportunistic, moment in time, matter of seconds and minutes before abducted, and obviously not known to the offender. And I believe that that's what's happened. And I sadly also, evidence tells us through the FBI child abduction manual, which is very, very detailed and very good because they've got 10 times as many child abductions and strange child abductions as we've had in the UK, that she would have been dead within 72 hours.
Oh, God. Awful. And do you think we'll ever know? Do you think we'll ever have concrete evidence for what happened?
Sadly, I think it's probably unlikely, but I always use a caveat is that we have to remain positive that one day we will, and I remain that with all my cases, that I remain positive that one day, ultimately, that offender will be brought to justice. And I have to believe that because otherwise there's no point in doing what I do. I will continue to fight for that justice, whether it be, the cases that we all know about, or other cases. I've got a case in Coventry, the disappearance of Nicola Payne, and she vanished and she's never been seen since. And I'm working on a program and a podcast now to get justice because I know who killed her.